The hum of the Unity Ark's core resonated faintly through the corridor, a constant reminder that the ship drifted hundreds of light years from Earth, tethered only by the precision of its engineering and the fragile agreements of its interstellar crew. Fluorescent lights flickered against the sterile chrome walls, illuminating the faint tremor of tension that lingered even in silence. Ethan Cole adjusted the strap of his utility belt as he crouched beside an open panel. Sparks snapped against the back of his glove as he reached into the wiring. No wonder life support dropped. "This conduit's cooked worse than Sunday bacon," he muttered. His words bounced off the narrow walls, unheard except by the ship's internal logs. He preferred it that way. Quiet suited him. He was the only human among a crew of over 80 Zolari, tall, androgynous beings with translucent skin and obsidian eyes, all intellect and order, bred for efficiency. To them, Ethan's methods were antiquated. Manual work was a novelty, an artifact of biological stubbornness. Yet, when systems failed and diagnostics looped, it was Ethan who made things hum again. He was patching the last fiber when the panel hissed. Instinct took over. He twisted, shielding his face as the power conduit erupted. A hot shard of metal sliced across his arm, and pain exploded in vivid red. The floor rose toward him as his knees buckled. His vision swam, the blue of his sleeve deepening with a spreading stain. Somewhere above, a high-pitched alarm chirped. Darkness crept along the edges of his sight. He awoke to cold light and alien voices. "Tissue damage exceeds tolerances. Begin prep for regenerative matrix." Ethan blinked into the harsh glow of the med bay. Sleek equipment gleamed under surgical bulbs. His arm throbbed in sync with his heartbeat. The skin flayed open in a ragged line. Zolari students moved like shadows beyond a transparent barrier, observing, noting, discussing. He was a specimen to them now. A familiar voice pierced the haze. "Human Ethan Cole, you are conscious." It was Professor Zvarn, the medbay director. Tall even among Zolari, Zvarn's features remained unreadable, but his tone carried a trace of concern. Ethan tried to sit up. Pain lanced through his shoulder. "No offense, Doc, but I don't want alien nanobots playing tic-tac-toe in my bloodstream." Zvarn approached, thin fingers clasped behind his back. "You are in critical condition. Intervention is imperative. Our matrix will seal the wound at a cellular level without scarring or dysfunction." I said no. Ethan's voice was hoarse but firm. "You have Earth-standard supplies in that drawer. Gauze, needles, antiseptic. That's what I'll use." The professor tilted his head. "Manual stitching is inefficient. Crude. You will endure unnecessary pain." Ethan smirked despite the ache. "I've had worse fixing pipe bursts in 0G. This I can handle." A murmur rippled through the observation chamber. The students were riveted. Their data sheets fluttered as they documented his refusal in real time. "You cannot perform this procedure unaided." Ethan leaned back with effort. "I won't let anyone else do it either. Not unless they're human. And since I'm the only one here." There was a pause, too long, too measured. Finally, Zvarn gave a subtle nod. "Very well. Autonomy is recognized in accordance with Human Alliance protocol." The medkit clinked as it was placed beside him. Scissors, sutures, sterilizer. Primitive tools by Zolari standards. But in Ethan's hands, they were old friends. He rolled up his sleeve, jaw tightening as the wound gaped, angry and raw. Blood oozed sluggishly down his forearm. He reached for the antiseptic with his uninjured hand, biting back a curse as it seared across torn flesh. The aliens watched in silence. No one moved. No one interrupted. He began the stitch, needle through skin, thread pulled tight. Each motion deliberate, each grimace a testament. The pain was real, but so was his resolve. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His breathing slowed to a practiced rhythm. Through the transparent divider, a Zolari student whispered, Why does he refuse superior treatment? Another answered, he values agency over outcome. Pain is accepted, even chosen. Svarn watched without expression, but the deep set of his shoulders hinted at something unspoken. By the fourth stitch, Ethan's fingers trembled. He steadied them. "Come on, not now," he muttered. "Keep it together." One of the students leaned forward, fascinated. "It is ritualistic." "No," said Svarn quietly. "It is human." When Ethan tied off the final knot, blood had dried in streaks along his forearm, and his pulse thudded dully in his ears. He slumped back against the table, chest heaving. The room was still. Svarn stepped forward and examined the crude sutures. He said nothing of their unevenness or the small gaps between them. Instead, he placed a sterile wrap gently across the arm. "You have completed the repair," he said. "Why?" Ethan stared at the ceiling for a moment before answering. "Because it was mine to fix, and because pain reminds you that you're still alive." In the gallery, no one spoke. They had witnessed many procedures, but none like this. It wasn't just biology. It was something else, something messy and strange and powerful. Svarn turned to his students. "Log the experience. Full sensory capture. This will be your new case study." As they dispersed, their voices low with awe, Ethan closed his eyes. He knew the wound would ache for days. He knew it might even scar. But in a place where humans were statistics and cooperation often felt like condescension, he had reclaimed something vital. Not victory, not pride, ownership. And as the medbay lights dimmed, Ethan slept, not as a subject, but as a man who had chosen his own pain, and through it, reminded the stars that humanity would not be absorbed, not without leaving a mark. The sterile hush of the medbay persisted long after the procedure ended. Clean surfaces gleamed beneath soft blue lighting, casting faint reflections on the surgical wall. Ethan sat upright now, a gauze wrap tied around his stitched arm, his expression caught between fatigue and defiance. The ache in his muscles was familiar, earned, not inflicted. The subtle tremor in his fingers had faded, but the quiet hum of eyes watching remained. Across the transparent barrier, a dozen Zalari students stood immobile. Their smooth gray faces betrayed no emotion, yet curiosity pulsed among them like current through exposed wire. Each held a data slate, screens glowing softly with live feeds of Ethan's procedure. The footage replayed in fragments. The clumsy piercing of flesh, the tightened jaw, the crimson trail that marked every loop of thread. He deliberately rejected our superior methods. One student murmured in Zalari dialect. "Their anatomy is unsophisticated," said another. "Pain tolerance may serve as a primitive evolutionary function." Svarn silenced them with a glance. "Your task was not to interpret physiology. Observe the choice." Inside the medbay, Ethan exhaled slowly. "If you're going to keep staring, maybe pass me a sandwich or a beer," he muttered without looking up. He didn't expect a response, and none came. Still, the silence had changed. It was no longer indifferent. It was invested. A soft chime signaled the arrival of medical monitoring drones. They floated to Ethan's side, scanning his vitals, flashing amber. His blood pressure was high. Adrenaline lingered. One of the drones projected a neural sedation protocol into the air. "No," he said sharply. "No sedatives. I'm fine." "You are not," Svarn said, entering the chamber with deliberate steps. "But you are also stable. That appears to be enough for you." Ethan looked up, meeting the alien's gaze. "Yeah, well, I don't like machines deciding when I'm allowed to be conscious." "Nor do I," Svarn replied. "I've canceled the protocol." Ethan raised an eyebrow. That wasn't the response he expected. "You are a contradiction," Svarn continued. "Your species embraces assistance, yet resists intervention. You arrived here aboard a vessel built through shared technology, yet you distrust what we offer." "It's not about the tech," Ethan said. "It's about choice. When everything's automated, perfected, you lose something. A piece of yourself. If I hand over every scar to a machine, what's left to say I lived through anything? Svarn studied him for a long moment. Suffering as proof of existence. That is not a universal value. It's not about suffering, Ethan said. It's about enduring. Standing back up when things go wrong and knowing you did it. That means something. The door behind Svarn slid open, and two students entered, their slates clutched tightly. "Professor," one of them said, "may we speak with a human?" Svarn glanced at Ethan, then stepped aside. The students approached cautiously. "We have reviewed your procedure," the taller of the two said. It was inelegant, yet compelling. "That a compliment?" Ethan asked, squinting at them. The second nodded. "We have only studied theoretical trauma responses. Watching you act with limited tools was instructive. It wasn't meant to be a lesson. But it is," the first student said. "You treated yourself without oversight, without collective input. That concept is alien to us." "No pun intended," Ethan muttered. But he saw the earnestness in their dark eyes. Curiosity without condescension. "Your kind," the second student said, "seems to regard pain as a threshold, a trial. That is not how we were taught to view injury." "Yeah, well, we bleed easy," Ethan said. "We just don't always admit when it hurts." They fell silent. For a moment, the air between them felt less like an observation deck and more like a fragile bridge being built, thread by thread. When the students left, Svarn remained. "Your actions have raised a question I was not prepared to address," he said. "We have advanced beyond the need for discomfort. You have reminded us that the need may not be the only measure." Ethan leaned his head back against the medbay wall. His body hurt in ways he hadn't let himself acknowledge. "So what happens now?" "We study you," Svarn said. "Not just the wound, but the will." Sounds like a new kind of dissection. Perhaps, but one of thought, not flesh. There was a pause, and Ethan let it stretch. A flicker of weariness crossed his face, quickly masked. He was running on instinct now, the kind that came from too many years fixing things others gave up on. "You going to use this?" he asked. "We already have. Your procedure is being distributed to Zalari academic clusters. Not for medical technique, but for psychological insight." Ethan blinked. "You're making a case study out of my stitches." "More accurately," Svarn said, "out of your defiance." Ethan couldn't help but laugh. It was a dry, rasping sound, but genuine. "You picked the wrong guy to put in your textbooks." "On the contrary," said Svarn, stepping toward the exit. "I believe you are exactly the anomaly we needed." The door slid shut behind him. Ethan sat in the quiet once more. The medbay lights dimmed gradually, adjusting to his circadian rhythm. He let his head rest against the wall, eyes half-lidded, the stitched arm cradled loosely in his lap. His body hurt. His pride didn't. And somewhere in the ship's data stream, his act, bloody, imperfect, human, was being analyzed by minds that had never considered that pain might not just be a flaw in the system, but a testament to something deeper. The ship vibrated subtly as systems reset. Outside, the stars spun slowly past. He watched them until his eyelids grew heavy. And as sleep claimed him, Ethan wondered, not for the first time, if maybe scars were meant to be shared. The Unity Arc's rhythm had shifted. Where once Ethan's presence was tolerated as functional necessity, now it drew stares charged with silent inquiry. He walked the halls with his arm bandaged and stiff, each movement a reminder not only of pain, but of unexpected consequence. The Zalari no longer whispered solely in his absence. They asked questions in clipped, careful comment, watched his fingers with fascination as he adjusted pressure valves or recalibrated circuitry without holographic interfaces. They weren't just observing. They were studying. The change wasn't subtle. Tools he had to request before now appeared in neatly stacked kits outside his cabin. Environmental controls adjusted to his Earth-normal preferences without him filing a requisition. One morning, he found a Zalari-engineered screwdriver optimized for human grip. Its sleek design alien, but intuitive. A note was attached, and signed, but unmistakably student-made. "We considered your hand's resistance arc." He kept it. In the ship's hydroponics bay, a place once quiet save for the whisper of nutrient mist and automated harvests, Ethan now met regular company. The first was Sela, the student who'd first called his crude stitches compelling. She approached while he inspected the route, broth spreading through the spinach trays. "May I assist?" she asked, standing precisely 1 meter away, as if distance itself required calibration. Ethan grunted. "Only if you've got a good eye for mold." She leaned in, eyes glossy like oil on water, peering at the black-spotted leaves. "You should use heat. Incinerate the tray. The bacteria can evolve around standard cleansers." "That's overkill. These trays are reusables. I'll spot clean and isolate the strain." He paused. "We call that triage. Fixing what we can instead of burning the whole thing." Sela said nothing, but she didn't leave. She watched as Ethan worked, hands stained green, sleeves rolled up, sweat beading at his temple. When he finished, she handed him a damp cloth, unasked. "You willingly engage decay," she observed. "I engage reality," Ethan replied. Others followed, not for conversation, but to see, to understand. In the human's imperfection, they sensed something invaluable. And Ethan, though reluctant to admit it, began to see them not as drones or lab coats with legs, but as fledgling minds hungry for something they'd never been taught: uncertainty. Still, curiosity alone wasn't comfort. A new discomfort was brewing aboard the Unity Ark, one that no one dared name. It started with the plasma conduits, overheating in short, erratic bursts. Then the ship's gyrostabilizers drifted off half a degree, forcing correction. Small things, subtle, but uncharacteristic of Zalari precision. Ethan ran diagnostics in silence, furrowed brow hidden beneath his fraying cap. He saw the patterns forming like bruises beneath the surface. He brought his Varn. "These failures aren't mechanical," he said, voice low. "They're systemic, coordinated. Someone's testing us." Zvarn's gaze narrowed. A system cannot test itself. Then someone outside the system is doing it. Or worse, inside, but not loyal. For a species bound to logic and transparency, the idea of subterfuge was corrosive. Treachery didn't exist in Zalari culture as Ethan understood it. Disagreement, yes. Divergence, sure. But sabotage? It was a foreign concept, and that made it dangerous. "You're suggesting intent," Zvarn said, evenly. "I'm saying we're being watched, and not in a classroom sense." They stood in the central monitoring room, data scrolling across curved panels. Zalari personnel filtered through like blood cells, efficient and silent. Ethan scanned the feed for anomalies in behavior, as much as in code. He didn't need to prove sabotage yet. He just needed them to consider it. "Do you believe your presence here has triggered this?" Zvarn asked. Ethan didn't answer right away. "You ever throw a rock into still water?" he said at last. "Doesn't matter how small the rock is. The ripples reach everything." It wasn't an admission, but it wasn't denial either. That night, the lights dimmed earlier than usual. The ship's AI paused its bedtime announcements. Ethan sat at the edge of his bunk, boots untied, staring at the dressing on his arm. The pain had dulled, but something deeper pulsed now, a sense of weight he couldn't shake. His cabin door chimed. He opened it to find Sela, alone, hands folded at her waist. "I found a data breach," she said, buried in diagnostic subroutines. Patterned. Intentional. Ethan stepped back to let her in. The lights inside flickered once, then stabilized. "Could be an experiment," he offered. "Simulation test." "No, it's not academic. Someone is masking surveillance pings through sensor relays." She paused, And they're not Zalari. Ethan's breath caught. Then who? Her answer was quiet. We don't know. Yet. They sat across from each other at the small table. The ship vibrated faintly beneath them, like a throat suppressing a cough. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, thinking of every unnoticed flicker, every noise too quickly dismissed. You think it's external? I think, she said, someone wants to see how far humans bend before breaking, and how far we will go to resist. Ethan met her gaze. There was no fear in her, only calculation. But beneath that, something humanizing, a recognition of danger. We'll find out, he said. But we do it my way. And that is, we don't just fix the damage, Ethan said. We trace it back. We get our hands dirty. Sela inclined her head, the Zalari gesture for agreement. Then we begin tomorrow. As the door closed behind her, Ethan leaned back and stared at the ceiling. The wound on his arm itched. Outside, in the dark between stars, something stirred. Watching. Testing. He wasn't afraid of pain. He never had been. But now he knew. It wasn't just flesh they wanted to open. It was trust. The hull groaned. A sound Ethan had come to interpret not as danger, but as the ship thinking. The Unity Ark had learned to make noise, and lately, it did so more often. He moved swiftly through the narrow service shaft behind Sector 12, Sela close behind, their flashlights cutting narrow cones of clarity through the dark. The conduit walls shimmered with condensation, beads of moisture clinging to coolant veins and cable lattices. Up ahead, a glint of silver caught Ethan's eye. A data spike, wedged into the relay node. He crouched beside it, fished a small tool from his belt, and pried the device loose. No Zalari signature, he confirmed, handing it to Sela. Encrypted. Low frequency. Broadcasting just beyond internal range. Sela rotated the spike in her slender fingers, antennae flaring faintly in the low light. This matches the signal anomalies we've seen. Someone is receiving our internal sensor data from outside the vessel. Ethan nodded grimly. So, the question isn't whether we're being watched. It's how long it's been happening. They worked in silence, removing the last traces of tampering before sealing the panel. When they emerged into the main corridor, Svarn was already waiting, his posture rigid and unreadable. You've confirmed it? He asked. We have, Sela said. Someone has been monitoring our crew from beyond standard range. Covertly. And you're certain it is not a Zalari experiment? Ethan answered. It's not your style. You people don't do secrets. That's a human trait. Or something worse. Svarn absorbed the words like stone absorbing heat. Then containment becomes our priority. You will assist. Ethan hesitated. Not because he doubted the cause, but because he knew what came next. Interference. Isolation. Lies. The very things he'd fought against in every system he'd ever tried to repair. But this wasn't a leak or a cracked engine. It was a violation, and it had to be answered. Yeah, he said. I'll help. They formed a task group, unusual by Zalari standards, composed of students and technicians, not council-appointed agents. Sela became his liaison, translating protocols into human logic. Together, they traced a pattern. The signal tapped into life support monitors, camera feeds, even emotional telemetry. Every time Ethan had stitched a wire, lost his temper, or bled, it had been seen. Not just by curious students, by someone invisible. They're not trying to disrupt, Sela said one evening, poring over the data. They're studying, waiting. Waiting for what? For the moment we fall apart, she said softly. They didn't. Instead, the Unity Ark adapted. Ethan's approach, manual, imperfect, resilient, spread among the crew. Students mimicked his pragmatism. Maintenance logs began to reflect judgment calls instead of algorithmic routines. Autonomy took root in sterile halls. It didn't go unnoticed. The watchers grew bolder. Lights flickered where they shouldn't. Doors locked on schedules that didn't exist. One evening, The AI misreported the oxygen levels on Deck 6, triggering an emergency evacuation. No one was harmed, but it was a message. We're here. We control the variables. Ethan responded the only way he knew, by giving them less to control. He rewrote routines. He bypassed systems. He introduced noise, inconsistencies, chaos, but calculated. Sela called it introducing entropy. Ethan called it confusing the bastards. Then, just before lights out cycle, the voice came. Not over comms. Not through the AI. It was a direct signal, pulsing into his personal datapad. No ID. Just a phrase, printed in monochrome text. We know what you're doing. Ethan stared at it for a long time. Then he typed one word in return. Good. The next day, an external drone was spotted trailing the Unity Arkansas. No known configuration. No registry. It didn't approach, but it didn't retreat either. It hovered like a parasite just beyond reach, absorbing everything. Zvarn convened a private summit. We're being tested, he said. Probed for weakness. Observed for potential failure. Ethan stood beside Sela, watching the council members exchange alarmed glances. Then show them we don't fail. Zvarn turned to him. You have changed our crew, Ethan. Not through superiority, but through persistence. Imperfection embraced with conviction. That, it seems, is what our observers find most instructive. Ethan shrugged. Being human's not about being flawless. It's about showing up, over and over, even when it hurts. He looked out the viewport where the silent drone lingered. Let them watch, he said. Let them see everything. The bleeding, the patchwork, the stubborn refusal to quit. Maybe that's the message. In the hours that followed, the Unity Ark initiated a countersignal. Not aggressive, not encrypted, just open access. A transmission of life aboard the ship. Laughter in the cafeteria. Repairs made by hand. Students debating philosophy with dirty fingernails and grease-stained slates. The ship didn't conceal its humanity. It broadcasted it. The drone vanished 3 cycles later. No message. No trace. Just silence where surveillance had once sat. The crew remained wary. But they didn't return to the old ways. Machines remained offline. Manual checks became habit. And in the med bay, Ethan's old suture kit was placed in a glass case. Not as a relic, but as a reminder. Zvarn visited Ethan on the observation deck days later. They're gone, he said. For now, Ethan replied. Do you think they'll return? Maybe. But next time, they'll know we don't break easy. Zvarn folded his arms behind his back, eyes fixed on the stars. Perhaps that was the lesson all along. Not perfection, but persistence. Ethan smiled faintly. Told you scars meant something. Beneath them, the Unity Ark sailed on. Quiet, steady, still imperfect, still human, and entirely unafraid.